Well, good morning, everybody, and welcome to this virtual meetup with Ricky Timms joining us from Colorado. He has a quilt in our man-made exhibit, and then we'll also talk about his relationship to this quilt right here, also in our exhibit. Oh, look, there's his puppy. Which
There's
puppy
Cordelia.
is that?
That's Cordelia.
This is Cordelia. Yes, Cordelia.
All right. So we've got Ricky and Cordelia in Colorado. We're also joined by Tony Jacobson, who is the curator of this man-made exhibit. And Tony is joining us from just down the street at Pieceworks Quilt Shop here in Winterset. And I am sitting in the gallery at the Iowa Quilt Museum. We're located on the south side of the town square in Winterset, Iowa. If you've never been, check us out. And we'll talk a little bit more about the museum in just a minute. But we're going to start today with turning things over to Tony to tell us a little bit about how he came up with the idea for how he would exhibit this, or how he would curate this exhibit, this man-made exhibit. So I'm going to spotlight Tony and give him the floor for a few minutes.
All right. Good morning, everyone. Thanks for joining us. The thing about this exhibit that I wanted to be different from the other exhibits that are for male-only quilters is the fact that I wanted to show that men have been quilting for quite a while. Probably as long as women have been quilting, there's been some men on the periphery doing it. So part of what I've added to this exhibit that isn't usually in a man-made exhibit is that we've got 4 historical quilts. 2 were from 1935, 1 is from 1890, and then we have 1 from 1964. All that were, we do know for sure, were made by men. The other thing I want to do with this exhibit is not just show, do a juried show and show the top quilts from kind of an art aspect, but to show the different ways that men are involved with quilting. So we've got quilts that are made by designers who design quilt patterns, teach classes. We've got people who create them strictly for works of art and sell them as artwork. We have someone like Ricky Timms, who's kind of a celebrity in the quilting world and has definitely done a lot to bring quilting more mainstream to a lot of people. We've got people who do it for a cause. So we've got Quilts of Valor, and we've got other quilts that show things that people are using their quilting skills to bring something to attention of the American public. And so I wanted to show that there's a great breadth of how quilting is being interpreted by men. And that's what I've done with this exhibit. So I'm really glad to have Ricky here today to talk about how he got into quilting, because prior to quilting, he was well, he still is, but he had a really good music career and is a very talented musician. And so we want to hear a little bit about that too. But there's 2 quilts in this exhibit that are tied to him, and I'll let him tell the story of how he and his dad kind of started quilting together without knowing it. So
Yes, we definitely want to hear that story. So just again to point out what you're looking at, the quilt over my right shoulder is Ricky's quilt. And so I'm going to turn just a little bit so you can see that. You can see it's a little bit on the unsquare side on purpose, which makes it hang with a lot of motion on our wall. And then over here, over my left shoulder, is the quilt that came from Ricky's father. So we'll give a little bit more, zoom in on those a little bit later. But Ricky, I'm just gonna turn things over to you now. Why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and how you got into quilting, and then tell us a little bit about these 2 quilts that we're looking at here in the man-made exhibit.
Sure. So my quilting experience was totally unexpected. Like Tony said, I was a professional musician. And honestly, when people ask, how long was I, a professional musician? Well, I don't really even know when the profession started, other than I did start teaching piano lessons in high school. And that's how I worked my way through college. But I read music before I knew the alphabet. I started piano lessons at the age of 3. So I read music, I can compose, I can conduct orchestras and choirs, and I have a pretty good extensive knowledge of music theory. And I became a music producer, working in recording studios, doing commercials, jingles, films, and stuff like that for the audio portions for Ralston, Purina, Anheuser-Busch in St. Louis, Missouri, things like that. So music was a big thing for me, but I was also freelance. And I tell everybody that freelance is a glorified word for unemployed, because just trying to get the work was sometimes challenging. But during that time in St. Louis, I was 35 years old. My granny, who was at the time 83 years old, she was a widow. She actually was proposed to by an old friend. And I say old on two levels. She knew him from way back when, but he was 87 years old. He proposed to her and they were married. And whenever my mother in Texas and my mother and father decided to sell my granny's house and get rid of her belongings, she had an old sewing machine. It was a Kenmore electric sewing machine. I tell everybody it had zigzag and reverse. This machine was bought in 1955 at Sears and Roebuck. And that's when they used both names, Sears and Roebuck. And anyway, she bought that sewing machine during a tragic time. She and my grandpa had a child who was 16 years old. His name was William Albert. They called him Bud. And Bud was tragically killed in a car accident at the age of 16. And that was the kind of the catalyst that I think ultimately got the sewing machine into her life, because during that time of grief and recovery is when the sewing machine came along. And I came along a few months after that tragedy. So me and my granny were very, very close together. It was her only son. I want to interrupt my story briefly to tell you, because this is a good place to tell this. My grandpa, which is my mother's father, my granny's husband, he had married as a young man and started a family. His wife, they had a daughter, and then they had a son, and then they had another daughter. And this relates to our current pandemic, because the Spanish flu pandemic of the 1917, 1918, it took a lot of lives, but they managed through it. In 1921, there was a reoccurrence of the Spanish flu, not quite as severe. But in 1921, his youngest daughter was taken from them through the flu. And then a week later, his 10-year-old daughter was taken. And he and his wife, of course, had the son. His wife was pregnant with their fourth child. And in childbirth, she died and the baby died. So my grandfather had already experienced a lot of tragedy. He had a son. That was the only thing from that first marriage that had survived, the only child. And he ended up meeting my granny. They got married. And they had my mother and my aunt. So now there's three children, the first boy and my mother and my aunt. And then whenever this son that he had was 21 years old, he was killed in a car accident. So that tragedy, I mean, of course, it just devastated everybody. And then Bud was born. And then 16 years later, Bud is killed in a car accident. So my grandfather lost 5 of his 7 children. My mother and my aunt are still surviving. And I've always talked about the little ones that died so long ago. And I can't believe if all the years I talked about them, I only really recently realized those were my aunts. And they were. I just never thought of them that. It was so far in the past. But all of that brings me back to Granny and the sewing machine that she purchased. And as a young boy, I can remember can't be having FaceTime calls while I'm on the phone. The sewing machine was part of her grief recovery. And as a little boy, I remember sitting at her knee, watching her mend things and make things on that sewing machine. The thing that I remember most, and I know that everybody watching will realize this or understand what I'm saying, when Granny would wind the bobbin, I would watch how the thread would go to the bobbin, and on the bobbin, it would go like this. You know, there's that little back and forth motion on the bobbin with the thread. I thought it was magic. I couldn't believe it just knew how to do that. And I also remember, this is my other strong memory. I remember how my granny would have to reach for the clasp on the bobbin casing, and just the way her hand was held as she put that into the machine. Those are vivid memories. Now, I was never a seamstress. I never sewed anything. It wasn't, I mean, I did silly stuff just because there was a sewing machine, but nothing that was significant. So when Granny married, the sewing machine ended up leaving Texas and coming to St. Louis, Missouri, where I was living at the time. I decided it would be a good thing to put a lamp on. I didn't want it. I didn't need it. I just thought I could put a lamp on it because I needed furniture. I was self-employed. I was, what did I say a while ago? I was freelance. There we go. I was freelance, self-employed, unemployed. So anyway, I was also two-stepping during that time. I was boot scooting, and I decided I wanted to make a shirt to go wear dancing. So I decided to go into Cloth World. Now that was the predecessor to Joann's. And I went into Cloth World and I looked at the old pattern books and I thought, this is going to be stupid. I can't do the yoke and the piping and the snaps and all this to make a Western shirt. And as I was leaving, I saw a quilt book and I thought, well, I can make a quilt. It's got to be easier than a shirt. Nobody had told me any otherwise. I just thought a shirt had all these, these sleeves and the collars and all that. And a quilt was flat. And so I figured a flat thing would be a much easier thing to make. And now I know that the most complicated part of making a quilt is getting it flat. But still, when you're ignorant, you don't know. Remember, ignorance is bliss, right? So I didn't know. I could just do it. So I started making my first quilt in 1991. Here's the interesting part of that story. My dad was 65 years old that summer. And when he had his birthday, he retired, and I gave him a retirement gift. He had talked about wanting to make stained glass. So I bought him some glass, lead, solder, all the stuff that you would need, some patterns to make something stained glass. And I called home the week that I was starting my quilt. My parents knew that I was going to try to make a shirt, but they didn't know anything about the quilt. I called home on the weekend and I asked my dad how he was doing and how he was enjoying his stained glass. And he said that he decided he wasn't going to do any stained glass because he tried it and he broke some glass on the concrete and he was barefooted. And it didn't hurt him. It's just, it startled him. He then had to tiptoe around glass to try to get it all cleaned up. And he decided he didn't want to do that. And I says, well, then, so what are you doing with your time? He said, I started making a quilt. And I said, I was just stunned because I had started making a quilt and we hadn't discussed quilting at all. I was making a shirt. He was doing stained glass. And I stopped the idea of a shirt and went to quilt. He stopped his stained glass and went to a quilt. Now, I bought a book and a pattern, a sampler pattern, so that I could make a lot of different blocks. It was not a quilt shop. I didn't know quilt shops existed. I did not know there were guilds. I did not know there were shows. I was a true island, an island of not knowing anything about quilting. And my dad's mother, at the age of 85, had made her 3 children a broken star quilt. That's with all the diamonds, like a lone star with all the diamonds, and all the extra diamonds that go around in a circle around the central diamond. And he just looked at that quilt on the bed and decided if she could do that at the age of 85, he could do it at the age of 65. So he just dove in and started cutting out diamonds. And my dad's first quilt was a broken star quilt.
Ignorance is bliss.
Ignorance is bliss. But that's how it all got started. So, I mean, from there, I just became addicted. I just couldn't stop making quilts. And it wasn't long before, long story short, I ended up meeting people. I ended up finding a guild. I learned about the various shows and started, going to shows. And then I wanted to enter shows. And honestly, I will, just remind the viewers that I came into the quilting arena. I came in through the door of competitive quilting. I did not come in as a pattern writer. I didn't come in as an author. I showed quilts. That's all I knew to do. And I was slowly getting asked to teach locally and then regionally. And once some of my quilts started winning at international shows like Paducah and Houston, then I started getting invitations from a much further afield. So I became a teacher. And even then, I still wasn't a pattern writer. I didn't have any products to sell, nothing like that. So it's been this amazing journey. And in 1998, 7 years after I started quilting, I kind of shut down my professional music career and jumped into the quilting net, hoping that it would catch me. And that's where I've been ever since. And it's been an amazing journey. I love the quilters. I love the industry. I love the creative spirit. And I still get to do music in the quilting arena. It's been great.
Love that story. So now I want to go back and show our viewers the two quilts again. Now they've got a little context for them. So this is the one that Ricky made. Why don't you tell us a little bit about this specific quilt, Ricky?
Sure. So first of all, both of those quilts are made with my hand-dyed fabrics. So that's where the colors come from. I always approached quilting more from an art standpoint, even if I'm making something more traditional. And I do feel that I'm a contemporary quilt maker. I'm not traditional. I'm not art. I'm kind of on the fence between those. But this one is a bit more artful, but it's also based in a traditional, diamond in a square. And I mean, based on an Amish quilt. Now, that one was started in a quilt retreat. I do quilt retreats in my little town of Levita, Colorado. And when the students don't need me, then I'm just at the machine futzing. And so that one I was just futzing and it got bigger and bigger. And once I got it to that size, I decided that I could go ahead and finish it up with quilting. Now I know what they can't see in that picture is it's pretty heavily quilted. And there's a poem that I wrote that is stitched in the quilting. And it also uses free motion couching with really heavy cording that is like fluorescent colors of pink and yellow and so forth. So it's kind of encrusted with a lot of extra embellishments. And that quilt is called Lifelines. That relates to the poem that's in the quilt. The poem that's in the quilt is a very short poem, and I'll tell it to you. Can something come from nothing? Can we stop the hands of time? The road of life moves forward and the past is left behind. So that is the poem that's in the quilt. It's in the dark border and it's stitched in the quilting. And so it's a double meaning because the technique where I do those tiny, tiny, tiny little slivered yellow inserts, I call those lifelines, like the little lines on our hands. But if you have a poem and it's kind of about life, then those lines of poetry are also lifelines. So it's a little bit of a double meaning. And it had some, went to some exhibitions. It won a first prize in Houston, which was pretty shocking and exciting.
Yeah, it's definitely one of the quilts in the exhibit that you, now that the museum's open, you need to come and really take a look at it up close because, yeah, even in a photo that's much closer, you don't get all of that wonderful detail and texture that's in that quilt.
Yeah. I was going to try to see if I could
really heavily quilted, really.
A little bit closer, but I'm not sure that I can do that with any fidelity. So I guess people will just have to come visit in person.
Sure, sure.
All right, so I'm going to switch my screen just a little bit. So now this is the one that your father made. Tell us your father's first name.
Okay, my dad's name is Richard. His full name is Richard Lee Timms, and my birth name is Ricky Lee Timms. Okay. So I'm not a junior, and my most formal name is Ricky. So people think it's a nickname, but for me, it's my given name. So, all right. So my dad, he kind of swam in the realm of traditional quilting. And in that respect, he ended up making, Jacob ladders, blocks, log cabin blocks, and things like that. Over the years, this is the part of a funny story with my dad, because of course, we were both using commercial fabric early on. And then by about 97, 98, I started hand dyeing fabric. And after a while, it did become part of my business. But once my dad discovered my hand-dyed fabric, he never wanted to use commercial fabric again. And it was not because he didn't like the commercial fabric. He liked the ease of working with the hand-dyed fabric because, in his words, he could never sew a piece on upside down. Because there's no right or wrongs to the fabric. He could just sew it and he wouldn't have to go, dang it, I got it upside down and have to, pick out the seam. He just really liked that. So it got to where my dad had zero sense of color. And my fabrics were so colorful that they really looked like a bowl of Fruit Loops all the time. So I was the one that started putting fabrics in a bag, and I would coordinate like 8 yards or 10 yards of fabric. And I said, Dad, on the next quilt you make, only use these fabrics. And he would, and then it would have my color sense on it because it was those 8 or 10 fabrics. Well, then I had the idea to do this quilt, and I said, and I actually put it on my dad. I said, Dad, this is a different pattern than you've ever made before. So with this being a different pattern than you've ever made before, it's pretty easy. It's a snowball block. And if you just put the little squares on the corner and sew across, you can trim off and sew these blocks and put them together. So I sent him the bag with, actually I used a cutter, and I pre-cut the 5-inch squares. So they were pre-cut, and the little corners were 2-inch squares. So those were pre-cut. So all he had to do was start sewing them together. Now I wasn't with him, he was in Texas, and he put the blocks together and he put them in this arrangement with no true rhyme or reason, but I thought it turned out to be beautiful. I mean, the rich colors just really swam around this quilt. And if you do go to the museum, it looks like velvet whenever you stand up next to it. And it's not suede, it's not velvet. It's just this beautiful texture. And then my dad's quilts were always quilted by somebody else. Not always, he did some quilting early on, but as he was getting up into years, now he made this quilt, let me see if I can guess, he would have been about 85 years old when he made this quilt. And so we sent it off to one of my good friends. Her name was Dana Lynch, and she quilted it with that incredibly beautiful, beautiful quilting. It's beautifully done. And I just do have to say, we lost Dana this past November. She passed away from a cancer that she just couldn't beat. But she tried for 6 years. She was faithful and inspirational. So it's a treasure, not only because my dad made the quilt, but it's also a treasure because one of my very good friends quilted it. So, my dad ended up getting Alzheimer's. And so he was probably at the beginning of Alzheimer's when he made this quilt. It is the last quilt that my dad made on his own, I should say, piecing the top on his own before the disease got too advanced and he could no longer do quilting the way he used to do it. So it's a very special quilt to me and to our family.
Yeah, and this picture doesn't do it justice, but the colors are just so rich, and the quilting, it's this beautiful feather, kind of feathery design around the border, and it's just fantastic. So I do hope that several of our viewers today will get the opportunity to come and check it out. So I'll get back here so we can see both quilts. So we've heard a little bit about how you got into quilting and kind of your story in the earlier part. Tell us a little bit about some of your current projects or upcoming projects. What have you got in the hopper in the future?
Well, let me first tell you that I just finished a quilt to enter in Houston, which I met the deadline the day that it was due. Yay, we all do that, the king of the last minute perhaps. But I'm not showing that quilt because I don't want the public to know the design. I don't want any of the jurors or the judges to know the design. I'll reveal that quilt later, but It felt really good to be in the studio. I will say it's not a big quilt. It's 45 inches square, so it's a good size wall quilt, but it's certainly not a full size big quilt. But it is pretty darn intricate in its piecing, very unusual piecing, and its colors, and it's almost like a quilted sampler. I have, I don't know, something like 15 to 20 different styles of quilting quilted in it. And the quilt is ultimately about diversity and how that diversity brings about unity, and a timely message for now, when I do believe that it's okay to be we can be different. We can all be different, but if it's our differences come together, we can all be beautiful and be one. So it's a little bit of a statement. Even though it won't appear that way, that was what was in my heart while I was making it. Now, as far as the big project that I'm working on, I have been writing a novel for the past 2.5 years with a friend of mine named Kat Bowser. And the novel is based on a quilt. Or I should say the quilt is what inspires the story, but it is not about a quilt. There is a quilt, but the story is not about a quilt. So, sorry, we're having like 70-mile-an-hour wind gusts outside right now. I'm watching my patio furniture fly across the terrace. As long as it doesn't come through the window, I'll be okay. So the name of the book is called Lizzie Albright and the Attic Window. And Lizzie is a 10-year-old little redheaded, freckle-faced, over-imaginative girl, and she is celebrating her 10th birthday on Christmas Eve, 1964. Now that's critical because most quilters, at least the ones that I saw up at the top, most of us can relate to 1964. The Beatles are big, beehive hairdos, mini skirts, station wagons with rear-facing seats at the back. That is Lizzie's world. Now, Lizzie ends up going with her family. By the way, she is from a place called Overland Park, Kansas. And that's true because my co-author was raised in Overland Park, Kansas. And she happens to really love The Wizard of Oz. And The Wizard of Oz, of course, takes place in Kansas as well. The family leaves on Christmas Eve and drives to a place called Cordelia, Kansas. Where's my dog? Cordelia, where are you? Cordelia, come here. Come here. Come here, see me. Come here. Good girl. Let's show everybody Cordelia. This is Cordelia. She's made it into a book. Here's baby. Yes, you are. You're such a sweetie. She is a Great Dane, and she is named after the place in the book. So Cordelia, Kansas is a fictitious place down in southeast Kansas, in Labette County, if anybody's trying to figure out where it is. Anyway, Granny, Lizzie's granny, lives in a mansion, the town mansion. The town was actually named and founded by one of Lizzie's ancestors, and the wife of the founders, her name was Cordelia, so that's why it's named Cordelia. Lizzie loves to be in the attic. That's where she plays with the stuffed animals and plays dress up and tells stories and all of this. And on Christmas Eve night, she and her mother and her granny are up in the attic, and they're going through an old cedar chest that sits under the attic window. Attic window. I'm going to say that again because quilters will understand why it's an attic window. And then later that night, they go through the cedar chest, and she discovers an old quilt. The quilt was made by her granny in 1930 during the Great Depression. I will tell you what's crazy about this. The chapters that I wrote regarding this quilt, the history of the quilt and the Great Depression, and how the family was trying to survive during this time, because they had a lot of wealth and a lot of wealthy people went down during the Great Depression. I went back to read this now during this time of COVID pandemic, and I'm looking at myself being a business person with a small business, and I'm doing everything I can just to try to survive. All of my events have been canceled and so forth. So that was kind of an interesting parallel. But the quilt so it's very much a 1930s sampler quilt. and Lizzie learns the names of the blocks. And it's the names of the blocks that spark her imagination. It's the names of the blocks that ultimately lead us to the story. The border has a flying geese border all around it. And as a result of that border, Lizzie ends up meeting a goose, and they fly away to where our story takes place. It is not a little light book. It is not a little kid's picture book. It is a novel. And I know, Marianne, you're still watching, but I will tell you, my 60,000 page novel turned into a almost 90,000 page novel. And it's taken a tremendous amount of love and patience and time to get all put together. But I am proud to say that that book will be going to print in about 8 or 9 days. So those of you that pre-ordered have been waiting, it is coming very soon now. It is an extremely exciting book. It is very much The Wizard of Oz meets Alice in Wonderland meets Harry Potter. So it's a fantasy novel. There's magic, there's mystery, there's suspense. And if I was to say what it is about, it's about overcoming obstacles. It's about truth and honesty. It's about how betrayal and dishonesty can turn and become a big problem. And it's also about encouragement, because Lizzie, our 10-year-old girl, is a heroine, and her personality can give courage and inspiration to other young kids. My goal is that the quilting demographic will read this book with their youngsters, because it's extremely cross-generational. And we have the Lizzie Albright quilt that I designed so that we could all make the Lizzie Albright quilt together. And I designed fabric with Ben Artex that are already available now. And the kits that I'm putting together will be here in the next 2 or 3 weeks. And we can all use the actual fabric described in the book to make the Lizzie Albright quilt. So it's kind of a whole thing. And that has totally consumed my quilting world for the last 2 years, just because of writing and on top of everything else that I do normally in my life. So that's my big creative endeavor, writing a book. I'm going to be a novelist. I'm maybe a novice novelist. How about that?
But along with co-writing, you also illustrated the cover.
Yes, I did illustrate the cover, and I don't have a picture of the cover to show anybody, but yes, I did illustrate the cover. I did pull a graphic artist in at the end to help me spruce up what Lizzie actually looked like, but the house and the scene and the goose I did, oh my gosh, the goose on the front cover. Lizzie is on the front cover, flying on the back of a goose, wearing a red cloak with McDougal, who is a little Scottish terrier, snuggled up in her arms. Excuse me. So yeah, so our kind of 3 main characters are Lizzie, McDougal, the Scottish terrier, and Greta, the goose.
That sounds super interesting, Ricky. And I have a 11-year-old daughter at home who has started to help me quilt, loves Harry Potter, loves Alice in Wonderland. So I think that I will be picking up a copy of the Lizzie Albright book.
I'm so excited, Megan. I'm so excited. And the crazy thing is that the story, it's not a through story. There's places where we turn the page and you're going, huh? Who are these people? In Lizzie's world, this story takes place in 1 day. But in the book story, it takes place over about 80 or 90 years.
Well, I think it's great, from a mom,
it's pretty cool.
Teacher standpoint. I think it's great when novels like that can wrap in some historical elements, just to expose these 21st century kids to what was life like in the 30s, 1930s, 1960s, because they'll be seeing the 2030s here pretty soon.
It'll be so fun for them to ask you about beehive hairdos and Aquanet hairspray and Juicy Fruit chewing gum and Magnavox stereos that have the record player and the radio all in one in the cabinet. All of that is in the book. So it's kind of fun to have that nostalgia.
Sure.
Oh, but let me say this. So because it's a fantasy book, people think that she's going to go back into it because there's a curse and there's a witch and there's a castle. So it sounds like it's going to be very Shrekville with a village and a castle, right? It is so not that. It is all back to my steampunk. Get my hat on here. It's all very steampunk. They go to this place where there's these little motorized tricycles that they ride on, and they wear funky clothes, and they have these devices that are like our cell phones, and they can actually text each other and do pictures. So the kids will relate to that the way that my generation are going to relate to the six. It's just really fun.
Yeah, well, that sounds exciting. And when that book comes out, send us a link and we'll put it on our website so that people can find it. Yeah.
I will do that for sure.
Yeah. So in addition to this, you've got pattern writing and fabric and the book. Tell us a little bit about the quilting show, because that's when we first met you, Ricky, and Alex, when you were here at the end of 2018. We decided it was October 2018. And you were actually here in the Iowa Quilt Museum, and you recorded an episode, actually, 3 episodes for the quilt show?
Yeah, or more. Well, we did, I don't remember. We did a bunch. I told everybody already, go check out Mary Ann's for sure, but there's other episodes in around that time that were filmed there. And MJ Kinnaman was filmed there. That's one of the ones I remember. TheQuiltShow.com is an online website for quilters. It's probably the most exhaustive, largest site we've built that's been ever built for quilters. And it was to house the show. The show, rather than being delivered on television, is delivered on the internet. We currently have a stay-at-home special for $19.95 for a 6-month membership. And it's like Netflix in the way that you can go look at all 318 shows anytime you want to. Just go open them, play the show. You can have your laptop or your computer running in the background while you're quilting and enjoy quilting shows. So you can do a 6-month membership right now for only $19.95, which is a huge savings. So if you'd like to do that, that's at thequiltshow.com, thequiltshow.com. No spaces, no anything, no, just thequiltshow.com. And it's hosted by myself and Alex Anderson. So we are not the guests on the show. We do teach on the show, but we bring in guests and we highlight quilters. So it's a fun endeavor, but it's not just the show. On the website, we've got tutorials, we've got classrooms, we've got a forum, we've got interaction. We do a quilt of the day every single day. We do 4 newsletters a week, bringing information about the quilt world, quilts, news, special tools, techniques. All of that's coming out in the newsletter 4 times a week. So it's been a really, really good opportunity for us. And we're in our 13th year, starting our 14th year. And the problem is COVID. We had to cancel our taping in March because the studios were all closed. And we normally shoot in front of a live audience, but the audience isn't going to be around for a while. We're having to do some different things right now. We do plan to tape in studio in August with no live audience and only a crew, but we'll just keep pushing forward. It's been an exciting endeavor, and I've enjoyed it. It's been very rewarding to be able to truly reach quilters worldwide. We're worldwide in over 100 countries that watch the show.
Yeah, it was just a really neat experience to have that whole thing happening here at the Quilt Museum. And if you want to come back, you'd be welcome to come back and tape here anytime. It's a little bit more secluded. We'd welcome you back anytime. So tell us about you. Another of your projects is the Quilt Luminarium, which I'm not terribly familiar with, but I take it as a conference of sorts. And I've looked on your website and it looks like several of those that were scheduled for early this year have been rescheduled for later, including the one in Omaha, which is fairly close to us. So give us a little, tell us what Quilt Luminarium is and give us a little update on that.
Okay. Quilt Luminarium is a 2-day seminar. I'm the only one teaching, so you're coming to look at my ugly face and listen to me blab for 2 days. But my goal is this. My goal is to teach you just about as much as I can possibly teach you in 2 days, and to inspire you. So I've had a good successful run with the seminars now for about 15 or 16 years. We turned it into the Quilt Luminarium about 5 years ago, revamped the whole program. And it is no sewing. You come and you put your butt in a chair and you listen. And I will say that I know that could sound boring because you don't want to sit through a 20-minute sermon at church, but I promise it's entertaining, it's informative, the pace is really good. And all you have to do is ask anybody who's been, and they'll just tell you. I was surprised I could sit there for 2 days, and I wanted to come back for a third day. So it's been a big part of my business. All of my events this year that were scheduled have been postponed. And so because of that, it's just been a real in my stomach, and I'm, postponing it to later. And the good news is most people understand why it has to happen and why it has to be postponed. But the one in Omaha has been postponed as well. And currently the new date is still on the calendar, and I'm excited to be back in Omaha. I did one super seminar in Omaha, I believe, in 2005. So it's been 15 years since I've been to Omaha to do one of these events. And I do encourage people to consider coming. We do not know yet what's going to transpire, but we will continue to watch the news and watch the reports and get, the guidelines from CDC and also from governors and state and well as city councilmen on what needs to transpire. But I do hope that those that are watching would become and be part of our seminar. I love it. You get a syllabus that's like this thick, and you get to take that home. And so you don't have to memorize everything I'm saying for 2 days, because I give you a massive amount of information.
Now, is this, during the Quilt Luminarium, is this where you wrap some of your music into your presentation as well?
I do a little bit. I have one lecture called The Music in My Quilt that compares music and art. And so to compare both music and art, I need to be able to show that. And so I have a keyboard, and as I begin a session or once I'm finishing a session several times during the couple of days, I will play a little piece of music for everybody just to give them a little musical treat. It's really kind of fun. So I encourage you to come and be a part of us.
Neat. Well, we'll try to keep our viewers updated on that as well as more information becomes available. So I'm just going to tell you a little bit about the Iowa Quilt Museum and what we've got going on, since I have a captive audience. And you can see we are open again. We were closed for 74 days, but we've been open since the 1st of June. We have a visitor who's behind us checking out Ricky's quilt right now. And she probably loves the fact that I'm talking about her. It's okay, wave at us. So while I'm just giving a little bit of information about the Quilt Museum, to our viewers, if you'd like to enter a comment or a question for Ricky in the chat window, we encourage you to do that, and then I'll share those out. Or if you want to use the feature to raise your hand, you probably find that in the participant window or near your chat window, or just unmute yourself if you have something you want to say out loud. But if you're not familiar with the Iowa Quilt Museum, we're located in Winterset, Iowa, which is just about 15-20 miles southwest of Des Moines. It takes 30 to 35 minutes to get to Des Moines, depending on where you're at. And we are in a building that was formerly a JCPenney local branch. This beautiful building with 16-foot ceilings. You can't really see from this video, but it's a very long and skinny building, but it's just the perfect place to hang these fantastic textiles. And we've been open, we're going on 4 years now. We've been here. We are a nonprofit organization, and our mission is to celebrate the history but also the current state and the future of the American quilt and the art of quilt making. And so we display both contemporary and historic exhibits. We have no collection of our own, so we change exhibits 4 times a year, and everything we display is on loan to us, which is why we get to visit with wonderful people like Ricky, and why we're so thankful that quilters and quilt collectors are willing to share their art pieces with us, their works of art. We are having a major event, actually it's in 10 days. On June 27th, we will host our annual Madison County airing of the quilts. We delayed that event a little bit, and we've moved all of our exhibits outdoors so that we can offer ample social distancing. But we will have quilt displays in over a dozen unique locations here in Winterset and Madison County, including displays in some of our famous covered bridges. Winterset is in Madison County, which is the home of the Bridges of Madison County, which was made popular by the novel, the movie, and then the musical. We are also the birthplace of the actor John Wayne. There's a museum dedicated to him here. And we are flanked on either side of the museum by two fantastic quilt shops. Tony and his partner Joyce, business partner Joyce, own and manage business Pieceworks Quilt Shop. And then there's a Ben Franklin, which literally is right next door to us on the other side, and it has a fantastic quilt shop among the other 5 and dime type stuff in the quilt shop. So Tony, what else should I be saying about the Iowa Quilt Museum?
Well, one of the things is if people want to go to Ricky's Facebook page, every so often you get to hear him on one of his 2 pump organs playing. So if you've ever wondered what one of those old-fashioned pump organs sounds like, Ricky's definitely very talented on showing you how they operate.
And Ricky has just...
So, hey, yeah, I was going to chime in and say, for the last 4 months, every Sunday, I do a Facebook post of me playing something on the pump organ, and I call it Church, y'all. And it's not always hymns, but most of the time it's a hymn of some kind. And the pump organs, both of them that I have, are about 120 years old. So pretty cool to have these in my house. And I just put up my Facebook page because try not to friend me on my personal page, because that's a limited number of people. You want to like my Facebook page, which I put it right there. You can go there and you can find me. Just like it.
Yeah.
Thanks for reminding me, Tony.
Yeah. And then you also have one that if you want to follow the lives of your 3 puppies that you've got.
Yeah. They can type this in, the Good Dog blog on Facebook. You're pushing, and I'm going to give this one too, Lizzie, ALBRIGHT.com. If anybody wants to pre-order a book, I put lizziealbright.com there for them as well, so they can see what that website looks like. And then you can see pictures of Lizzie, the front cover of the book and all that on that website. So yeah, those are good, all good little things.
And I'm going to add one more. This is your kind of catch-all Ricky Tim's website, where people can find information about the Quilt Luminarium and your retreats and all of that kind of stuff. So there's your official website page there. So, I should say one more thing. If you're looking for tickets to the airing of the quilts or more information about the Iowa Quilt Museum, I put the link at the very beginning of our chat window, but here it is again. It's iowaquiltmuseum.org. In addition to the airing of the quilts display during the day, we are doing an online auction, and that's a major fundraiser for the Quilt Museum. Of course, all small businesses and nonprofits are really struggling this year in the face of the COVID-19 pandemic. And we're faring okay, thanks to some government assistance and some from the Iowa Arts Council. But it is going to be a long time before we're back up to our typical visitorship. And so if people are interested in making a donation to the Quilt Museum, that is tax deductible, and we're encouraging you to do that. If we had had a ticketed event where we had invited Ricky to be in person, we would have maybe charged $10 or $15 to that event. So if you're willing and able to make a little donation to the Iowa Quilt Museum, we would sure appreciate that. I have not seen any questions come in to the chat window, and we've covered a lot of topics this morning. It's been really wonderful. I can't believe it's been 52 minutes already that we've been online. Tony or Ricky, or is there anything else you want to share with our viewership?
I would just say, everybody, just go ahead, Tony.
I just want to thank Ricky for taking time to join us, because as you can tell by all the different websites you're on and everything that you're busy, even in the time of COVID-19. You seem to keep yourself busy, but you're just not on the road this time.
I'm surprised that staying at home. As a matter of fact, I can say I have not left my county since March the 13th, and my county only has 6,000 people in the entire county. I am leaving later today to go to Pueblo, Colorado for the first time. I've got to do some blood work for a medical exam type thing, but I've been really stuck and sequestered, and I would have thought I would have had nothing but time. My time has been overwhelmingly consumed with all kinds of projects, and if nothing else, just trying to figure out how to regroup so that I can keep marching forward. My closing message would be to everybody to just stay positive and stay encouraged. I am certainly living in the darkest days that I've ever lived in, but I am not discouraged. I am pushing forward. I believe in the future, and I believe in myself, and I believe in you. So I would just encourage you just to stay positive, stay healthy, be smart. And with all that's going on in this world today, just keep a good candle lit that we're all going to survive this and weather the storm as best we can. Thank you very much.
Absolutely. Those are wonderful words to close with, Ricky. And again, thank you so much for being with us today. Thanks to everyone who tuned in. Thank you to Tony for curating this exhibit for us. We hope to see some of you visiting the Iowa Quilt Museum soon, if you're able to do that. Mary Ann, did you want to say something? You just popped on.
No, I'm fine.
All right. Well, we will close then, and thanks again for joining us. If you have anybody you know who was not able to join us this morning, we will post this to our YouTube site, and it will be available on our Facebook and our website as well. So have a wonderful Wednesday, everybody, and thanks so much.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.